measuring light. I don't know if you've ever tried that, but it's so much easier measuring the speed of dark, isn't it?
Is that a joke?
Yes.
It's an old man joke.
It's an old joke. Okay. Speed of dark. He's also a physicist for the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, and he was working for his dad. And what were they doing? They were mapping the Washington, D.C. area because of the war. This is the Civil War, and they're part of the individuals mapping the area so that the fortifications could be set up to protect Washington, D.C. from possible Confederate attack, basically. And at the same time, he was also doing his private philosophical studies. Then he went on to become a lecturer at Johns Hopkins University, and he was doing well there. In fact, one of the students that he influenced was John Dewey. So that's when we're looking at the connection between these various individuals that are the metaphysical club, how did John Dewey get into this? Because John Dewey went to Vermont University with his brothers. They all went together, even though he was the youngest, John Dewey. They all graduated together. And then John Dewey ended up going to Johns Hopkins University, and Charles Sanders Peirce is teaching logic there. At that point, he ended up retired to Milford, Pennsylvania, because he dated a divorced woman named Juliet. And apparently that was such a horrendous error on the part of a professor at a university in those days that not only was he fired immediately because of his going out on a date with a divorced woman, French woman, no less, but he could never get another job teaching anywhere because of such a horrendous, evil thing to do. And so he ended up deciding that alcohol was a fun thing, as you can imagine. And but he's married to Juliet. He marries her, and they live together in a cute little house.
No wonder he was bitter against James.
He was bitter against everybody, I think. I'll go. So. And he's probably the smartest one academically or logically. I mean, James is tremendous. I'm looking for his house. You can, so there's him and Juliet by a well at their house, which they named Arisbe. Arisbe. It's a Greek goddess, I believe. In any case, if you're interested and you're ever driving along the Delaware Water Gap in Pennsylvania, you can stop and visit this house, although I don't know why you would. Nothing special there. But it is a museum for Charles Sanders Peirce, and it's just 2 miles from the Walmart. So if you pass the Walmart, think, Charles, just 2 miles down on the right, you should find Arisbe, and you can stop in and tell me if it's as boring as I imagine. What are you going to get there? I don't know. Yeah, this is the place where he spent a lot of drunk hours and wrote really smart stuff. Okay. And Juliet lived longer. I don't know how she managed after that, because the money they had was from James, and James died before Peirce. So, very interesting, I suppose. He dies in 1914. I believe James died in 1912. So,
I think that just before the war, huh?
Well, they did live through the Spanish-American War and the Civil War. So they had war in their experience. Let me get back to here. Okay. So that's just a basic introduction to Charles Sanders Peirce. He knew James at Harvard and Dewey at Hopkins. But now I'm going to move on and give you an overview of William James, who was much more the one who popularized pragmatism. He was a very popular lecturer all over the country, and his books were very popular. Hardly anyone reads Charles Sanders Peirce's books unless you're into logic and maybe linguistics. But William James is still a very popular author. In fact, one of the books, if you go to the Barnes and Nobles, you'll find a book that's from 1900 still on sale. And that's The Varieties of the Religious Experience, which is still very, very popular. That's actually silly to buy a copy unless you don't mind spending $15 or something on a book, because it's online. Of course, you don't have to buy it to read it. In fact, any of the books I'll be talking about, except for like the contemporary ones like Louis Menon's book, are on the web. You don't have to go and buy them. So, so let me, I'll go through some of this other stuff here first. The pragmatic movement in American philosophy is what we're looking at. The unproblematic, now this is again from Menon, Louis Menon, and that's, what makes them all pragmatists? It's the unproblematic, the things that they all accept to be a pragmatist in their generation. Number one is the prestige of science and the scientific method. And that includes, by the way, Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution. They're empiricists, so they're all following the British empiricists. So they're very familiar with, of course, David Hume and John Locke, of course, and all those. Biological evolution, notice, so Charles Darwin. Ideals of American democracy, they're very, very pro-American, and specifically the side that Lincoln was on, right? So they're the part of the North, right? Peirce is the scientist. James is a psychologist, considered. This is a time when psychology is really part of philosophy, hasn't really split into a separate science yet. In fact, James is one of those who argues it should be. So really, as a psychologist, he's very important. His most important book, even though The Varieties of the Religious Experience is the most popular, the most important book by everybody that considers it is his Principles of Psychology, which for about 20 years after its publication became the textbook for courses on psychology, for the beginning of psychology. That was about 1,000 pages. And lots of people were influenced by it, including Husserl. I didn't mention this because at the time I hadn't thought of it, but I just read it last night. That Husserl's phenomenology that we talked briefly about, it's not just from Hegel, the study of phenomena, but is also picked up on William James, who talked about the flow of consciousness, the stream of consciousness, which is essentially what leads Husserl to pick up on that. So that's interesting. The ideals of American democracy. Peirce is a scientist, James is a psychologist. Mead, who moved to the University of Chicago, was a sociologist specifically. And John Dewey, we think of mostly, I mean, he did everything, but John Dewey, we mostly think of the impact he had on education and taking the theory of that master-slave dialectic and taking that to, well, how should you educate somebody if that's the way consciousness works? And so we need to change an education so that instead of everybody just sitting there and listening to someone rattle on and on and on and recording themselves, what we really need is an activity school where students actively learn and go through this dialectical process. And so it changed education, not just in the United States, but throughout the world, wherever it was influenced. China, Russia, Italy, etc. Okay. So Peirce is also going to change the name of pragmatism to pragmaticism, and Dewey specifically calls his instrumentalism because knowledge is an instrument. So William James's life, he was born in New York City. His father is Henry James Sr., who was a theologian, and he was a Swedenborgian follower of New Jerusalem. Have I mentioned Swedenborg, Emanuel Swedenborg? I don't think so. I have, of course, but not here, I suppose. So let's go.
Did he write a huge book?
He wrote at least 15 books.
There's one specific book that he's known for, right?
You mean Heaven and Hell, I guess? I think I have all of them at home, and I've read a little bit of some of them, but they're actually not that exciting as far as I was concerned. But the reason I have them is because the bookstore lady gave them to me because I was interested, and so she dumped them all on me. She insisted. So I ended up with 15 books by Emanuel Swedenborg. Where did I get them? If you're interested, you can go to Bryn Athyn. This is where I visited. Bryn Athyn is one of the new churches, and they're also called Swedenborgian, or I guess they're other names. Remember William James's father Henry was a member of this. But basically, Emanuel Swedenborg was a scientist, and at a certain point in his life, he suddenly had an experience, a religious experience, and he realized that he was Jesus in the second coming. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. He just had this experience, and he was convinced he was Jesus in the second coming. And so, actually, if you go to I think it was in the first one, and I think I go. So if you go inside that church, this is, sorry, the quality of video. You could tell I didn't make good videos even then, because I'm obviously walking around. I'm inside that church and taking pictures, and there all the stained glass windows are dedicated to Swedenborg in one way or another, including the main altar one has a big image of him as he's Jesus. It's the second coming. But the altarpiece, which was fascinating, is made to look just like the Ark of the Covenant, made out of gold. Let me see if I can. You see it? Oh, get back there. Shoot, where did it go? Can't really see it very well. I should have went up closer. But So you can visit Bryn Athyn. Notice this cathedral was made stone by stone as a copy of one of the big ones in England. So if you want to see a British cathedral, just stop by Bryn Athyn. Bryn Athyn is in the Philadelphia suburbs. It was the reason I stopped in and took a tour, not only of that, but also of the museum. There's a museum. I don't think so this isn't the cathedral, this is the house. They were very wealthy people. And so as you can see, that's their house. It's right on the same land with the cathedral, and that's their older house, that was the newer house.
Holy moly.
So, wealthy people, they built those, by the way, during the Depression.
Who financed it?
Pardon?
Who's the financiers?
They were very wealthy. The people that were members of that church were very, very wealthy. Reminds me a little bit of the what's that church that a lot of the Hollywood stars were members of?
Scientology.
Scientology.
They're still a member of, like, Tom Cruise?
Yeah.